stimuli from the outside world is berating your body, all the while your brain is tucked deep away inside your head. This raises the old philosophical question of exactly how does the world out there get in here? How's it going, AP Psych class? Welcome back for our Unit 3 review on sensation and perception. In this review, we are going to focus on the principle of sensation and perception and how our body takes in stimuli from the outside environment. We're also going to take a look at the senses in general. We're going to look at all the specific body senses and talk a little bit about their responsibilities in both sensation and perception. We're going to talk about perceptual organization and how our brain organizes all of this incoming stimuli that it's constantly dealing with. And we're also going to look at perceptual interpretation and how we cognitively interpret this incoming stimuli. Sensation is just the process of detecting stimuli, whether it be light, sound, heat, or pressure. Perception is going to be how our brain processes, integrates, and organizes all of our sensations. So metaphorically speaking, or similarly speaking, I'm not really sure. Anyways, metaphorically speaking, sensation will be our window to the world, while perception is how we interpret what comes through our window. Our sensory and perceptual processes work very well together at helping sort out complex environmental stimuli. Top-down processing is going to be how we use our prior knowledge and experience to interpret sensory stimuli, while bottom-up processing is going to be sensory-driven, and our perception is a result of how our brain interprets these incoming sensory stimuli. So to better understand this, let me give you two examples. First, I want you to imagine a pen. When you imagine this pen, what you do is you compare this to all the other pens you've ever seen before. You check to see if it's a black pen or if it's a blue pen. You check to see if it's one of those twisty twist pens or one of the clicky top pens. All these thoughts are occurring because you are relying on your prior knowledge and experiences of this object. Since you're very familiar with it, your brain fills in a lot of the blanks. This is what's known as top-down processing. Now imagine this second scenario. You're given an ancient artifact, something you've never seen before. It's from an unknown civilization and you get the opportunity to hold on to it. Since you've never seen an item like this before, you have very little to compare it to. You primarily are going to observe the artifact, gather data regarding the markings on the side, its color, its shape, what material it's made out of. This process is going to be data-driven because you have zero prior knowledge to help you fill in the gaps. This is what bottom-up processing is. With this example, we can even show how top-down processing and bottom-up processing work together. Let's say you're analyzing the artifact and it reminds you of a farming tool you saw in your world history class. This alters your perception of the item through top-down processing. So you analyze this item both using prior knowledge with top-down processing and through your sensory experiences using bottom-up processing. We are currently being exposed to external stimuli, whether it is light waves or sound waves. Our brain has the job of processing this information 24/7. At what exact strength do you think it takes for a stimuli to pass into our threshold of conscious awareness? Psychophysics is going to be the study of how physical energy relates to our psychological experiences. Psychophysics centers around the idea of sensory thresholds. When talking about sensory thresholds, it's important to differentiate between absolute threshold and difference threshold. The absolute threshold is going to be the smallest amount of stimuli that someone can detect 50% of the time. This can be with any of our senses. So let's say we're testing the absolute threshold of sound. Remember when you had to go to the nurse and have one of those hearing tests when you were younger, and the nurse would put those headphones on and play a tone in each ear at different levels? It is possible that they were testing for the absolute threshold of your hearing, trying to find out the tone and pitch where you would detect the sound half the time. Sensory systems are going to provide each organism with the ability to obtain proper sensory information that pertains to each organism's use for this information. The way that a frog's eyes are designed enable them to pick up only on small, dark, moving stimuli. If a bug were to fly in front of a frog, it would activate its receptor cells and allow the frog to quickly grab the bug. Interestingly enough, a frog could also be surrounded by thousands of bugs that were motionless, and the frog would eventually starve to death because it would not be able to detect any of the bugs around him. An example of this for people would be our strong tendency to pick up and detect stimuli audio frequencies that include human voice consonants as well as baby cries. This is the whole idea of signal detection. The signal detection theory states that the detection of a stimulus is going to depend on two things. One, the intensity of the stimulus, and 2, the physical and psychological state of the individual. To provide an example of this concept, I will give you 2 scenarios. Scenario number 1, imagine you're leaving the shopping mall late at night just as it closed, and your car is one of the last cars in the parking lot, and the parking lot is dimly lit. Scenario 2, this is going to be a similar scenario, same mall, same parking lot, but this time it is not going to be late at night. You're going to be leaving right in the middle of a bright sunny day. Chances are in our first scenario where it was dark out, you are going to be a lot more susceptible to detecting different noises like the leaves scraping on the ground or the trees swaying in the wind. The reason being, at night you're going to be at more of an alert state, making you more able to detect weaker stimuli that you would not detect in other scenarios. If you hadn't realized already, the absolute threshold only deals with one stimulus. Well, what happens when you are comparing 2 stimuli? That is where the concept of difference thresholds come into play. A difference threshold is going to be the smallest possible difference you can detect between 2 stimuli 50% of the time. The difference threshold is also going to be referred to as the just noticeable difference. A simple example that I would like to use to explain the difference threshold is, imagine you're holding a rock that weighs about 5 pounds. Well, if I came up to you and asked you to hold another rock for me that only weighed half a pound, chances are if I put that on top of your 5-pound rock, you would notice a weight change. Now imagine you were holding a 50-pound rock and I come up with that same half-pound rock and I place that on top of that 50-pound rock. Chances are you are not going to notice a weight change at all. Another way of looking at this would be a musician having to fine-tune their instrument to the exact specification to produce a specified sound. Or when you're with your friend at a concert and you can hear their voice over the rest of the crowd. Another principle we need to talk about in sensation is sensory adaptation. Have you ever walked into someone's house and upon entering, it just smells absolutely awful, and you're wondering how in the world does this person live here and not just die? Well, chances are they adapted to the sense. Sensory adaptation is going to be a decreased responsiveness to stimuli due to constant simulation. Another example of sensory adaptation would be not feeling your watch on your wrist or not feeling jewelry that you wear all day long. Now for our next principle, I am going to let you on in a little secret. Since the start of this video, I have not been wearing 1 shirt, I have not been wearing 2 shirts, but I've been wearing 3 shirts. Don't believe me? Rewind the video and check for yourself. If you did pick up on these changes, you are a very astute observer. If you did not pick up on these changes, it is okay, nothing is wrong with you. This is the whole idea behind selective attention. So selective attention is focusing our conscious awareness on a particular stimulus to the exclusion of others. This ability allows us to focus on one stimulus at a time and helps us function in a world filled with many stimuli. So our next topic is going to be the senses, and there is a whole lot of information involving each sense that we will not touch base upon in this review. So remember, if there is a certain topic you don't understand, dig deep into your notes, use your resources, try and understand it, and if you don't understand it, remember, you can always email me. I will do my best to help, I promise. Plus, I could use the human contact. So for the senses, I'm going to focus on these topic and principles that I believe are important. When talking senses, we are going to be talking vision, hearing, taste, touch and pain, smell, and our kinesthetic and vestibular senses. Before we get into each individual sense, it is important to understand the whole idea of transduction. Transduction is the transferring of outside signals into neural impulses. These neural impulses are transmitted from various sensory receptors depending on the stimulus. For each sense except smell, the information will travel to the thalamus, then to its specified area of the brain. Now to our most tested College Board senses, vision and hearing. So after entering the eye, light waves are going to hit the retina. The light-sensitive rods and color-sensitive cones convert the light energy into neural impulses, which are coded by the retina before traveling along the optic nerve where it next visits the thalamus. The thalamus then sends the information to its final destination at the occipital lobe. 2 theories of color that you may see tested on the AP test are going to be the trichromatic theory of color and the opponent process theory of color. The trichromatic theory of color states that the eye has 3 color receptors, one sensitive to red, one to blue, and one to green. When these receptors are stimulated, they can produce a combination of different colors. The opponent process theory of color states that photoreceptors are linked together to form 3 opposing color pairs. We have blue and yellow, red and green, and white and black. Activation of one member of the pair inhibits activity in the other. For example, cells that are inhibited by the color red are going to be stimulated by the color green, or stimulated by yellow and inhibited by blue. So when you look at a red apple, the red photoreceptors in your eyes are being stimulated while the green ones are being inhibited. You can also test the opponent process theory here. I'm going to show you an image, and I want you to pause the video and stare at the image for 30 seconds. After the 30 seconds, stare at the dot in the provided white space and take note of what you see. You may have noticed that you saw a reverse color of the image that was displayed on the screen. This is the opponent process theory at work. Through a mechanical chain of events, sound waves traveling through the auditory canal cause tiny vibrations in the eardrum. These vibrations are going to cause movement in tiny hair cells, which send a neural message to the thalamus, where it is then sent to the temporal lobe. On how we hear, frequency theory states that the rate of nerve impulses travel along the auditory nerve matches the frequency of a tone, allowing us to sense pitch. While the place theory is going to say that we perceive pitch because the brain can pick up on the area of the basilar membrane where it receives the neural message. Our sense of touch is actually 4 senses in one. With touch, we experience pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. These 4 senses can be combined with one another to create senses such as hot. One theory of pain is that a gate in the spinal cord either opens to permit pain signals traveling up small nerve fibers to reach the brain, or closes to prevent their passage. Because pain is both physical and psychological, it can often be controlled through both physical and psychological means. Think about the last time you were hurt and someone came up to you and instructed you to take deep breaths. Often an act like this relaxes the autonomic nervous system and relieves some of the pain. Taste is going to be a chemical sense, and like touch, it has 4 senses in one. Taste is going to include sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. Taste also includes the aromas that interact with information from the taste buds. I'm sure you've all heard the myth that if you can't smell, you can't taste. Well, this is partially true. So people who have lost their sense of smell, they've been known to only be able to differentiate between tastes of things like bitter and sour. However, the aromas associated with that taste were gone. And since that plays such a huge role in sensing taste, they end up not perceiving as much of that sensation. I also think it's time to break this myth right here. If anyone has ever showed you this image, shame on them. Shame! Taste, smell is also a chemical sense, but there are no basic sensations for smell as there are for taste and touch. Instead, there are 5 million olfactory receptor cells with their 1,000 different receptor proteins, and each one of these proteins recognize individual odor molecules. Some odors trigger a combustion of receptors. Unlike other senses, your senses of smell or olfaction bypasses the thalamus and goes directly to the olfactory bulb in the brain. Some information is then going to be sent to the hypothalamus. This is why smell can sometimes be associated with different memory or emotions. The rest of the information is going to be sent to the primary olfactory cortex, where fine distinctions are made between the odors. We also have 2 lesser known senses that help monitor our body's position and movement. Our kinesthetic sense is going to allow us to be aware of where our body parts are in relation to one another. This sense allows me to reach into my pocket, take out my phone, put it up against my ear without even having to think about it, flipping it back, putting it right away. I know, always got to flex the flip phone a little bit, no big deal. Our vestibular sense allows our body to maintain position and movement, allowing us to maintain a proper balance while walking. Vertigo is a sudden internal or external spinning sensation often triggered by moving your head too quickly. It can be caused by several different underlying issues, but what is occurring is that the semicircular canals in the inner ear are being disrupted, these being the sensory receptors for the vestibular sense. It causes this sense of spinning. Something as simple as spinning around and suddenly stopping causes a brief case of vertigo because the semicircular canal take time to reach its neutral state. So next up we have perceptual organization. In the early 20th century, Wolfgang Kohler, Kurt Kafka, and Max Wertheimer, love my German accent, they founded something called Gestalt psychology. So Gestalt psychology is going to focus on the idea that our mind organizes sensations into perceptions of meaningful patterns or forms. They called these gestalts. These early Gestalt psychologists were impressed with the seemingly innate way we organize raw sensory data into whole perceptions. Our mind structures this information that comes to us in many different ways, including form perception, depth perception, motion perception, and perceptual constancy. In form perception, the main concept we want to focus on is the idea behind the figure-ground relationship. The figure-ground relationship basically states that what we are currently looking at, we will perceive that object as a visual field, which would be considered the figure, and we will consider everything else the ground. The whole figure-ground relationship is continuously reversing as you focus on different objects. This can be seen in certain illusions, such as the wine glass picture. Is this a cup or 2 people staring at each other? You be the judge. It all depends on what you perceive as the figure and what you perceive as the ground. Once we perceive the figure and ground, we now have to organize this information into a meaningful way. This can be done through proximity, where we group nearby figures together. We see not 6 separate lines in this example, but 3 sets of 2 lines. This can be done through similarity. Figures similar to each other we group together. We see the triangles and circles as vertical columns, not as horizontal rows. Continuity, where we perceive smooth, continuous patterns rather than discontinuous ones. You can see in our example, this pattern could be a series of alternating semicircles, but we're actually to perceive it as 2 continuous lines, one wavy and one straight. Connectedness, just when things are uniform and linked. In our example here, we perceive spots, lines, or areas as a single unit. And last, we have closure. We fill in the gaps to create a complete whole object. So in our example here, we assume that the circles are completed, but partially blocked. Depth perception allows us to see objects in 3D, even though the images that strike our retina are in 2D. It also is going to allow us to judge distance. Research on the visual cliff study revealed that many species perceive the world in 3 dimensions at or very soon after birth. We use different binocular and monocular cues to transform 2-dimensional sensations into 3-dimensional perceptions. Our brains compute motion as objects cross the retina. Think of it the same way you would think of a movie. Movies are just motion pictures. Thousands of pictures that are going to be taken in quick succession that are going to be put together to form the illusion of motion. Your retina works the same way. Imagine you're on the side of the road and a car just comes flying by. As you watch the car fade into the distance, the retinal image gets smaller and smaller. The raw data that your brain receives shows that the car is shrinking. However, our ability to perceive depth also allows us to maintain that shapes and objects are constant even though they may show different retinal images. So our sensation may be a shrinking car, but our perception is a car going further off into the distance. For perceptual constancies, they are categorized in both shape and size. So even though an object may be changing in shape or size, we're still going to perceive it as the same object. We're going to perceive it as constant. Now, on to our last topic of perceptual interpretations. For years, philosophers have debated the origins of our perceptual abilities. Is it going to be nature or is it going to be nurture? German philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that knowledge comes from our inborn way of organizing information, while British philosopher John Locke is going to say that through our experience, we learn to perceive the world. In 1690, an Irish philosopher wrote to John Locke asking him, "A man born blind and now an adult, taught by his touch to distinguish a cube and sphere." So what he was asking John Locke was, do you believe that someone who was blind and taught themselves to distinguish between a cube and a sphere as a blind individual, would they be able to distinguish these 2 items with just sight if they were to gain vision? John Locke's response was no, because the man would never have learned to see the difference in the first place. In 1978, this case would be put to the test when a man born blind with cataracts had them surgically removed. As a result of the surgery, the man could now distinguish between figure and ground as well as some color, proving Kant partially correct. However, when presented with an object once familiar by touch, he could not recognize it by sight alone, supporting Locke's hypothesis. Our perceptions have this incredible ability of adapting to our environment. There have been experiments where people were given distorting sunglasses that shifted their field of vision to the right, to the left, even upside down, and people managed to easily adapt to this new field of vision and could carry on as normal. Our assumptions, belief, and culture are also going to play a role into our perceptions. Clear evidence shows that perception is influenced by our experiences. Our experiences, assumptions, and expectations oftentimes give us a perceptual set. A perceptual set explains why we see faces in space or the Loch Ness Monster in a lake. Another concept of perceptual interpretation is the context effect. The context effect often explains how cultural bias can influence perception. When this image right here was shown during a cross-cultural study, those questioned from East Africa believed it was a group under a tree and that the woman had a metal box on her head, while Westerners who were shown the same picture perceived this as a family who were indoors and the lady was just underneath of a window. Alright guys, that's it for our Unit 3 review on sensation and perception. Up next, your weekly FRQ. Enjoy. Good luck. Alright guys, as a closing reminder, remember to keep up with your studying. I know I say this at the end of every single video. It's only because I cannot stress the importance of making sure that you are taking the initiative to look over some of the course material. I can't tell you every single thing in these videos. I am leaning on you to take the initiative to make sure you are staying on top of the concepts and topics that you need to stay on top of. I'm sure you all are. See you next time. Peace.